Anything that's tactile, that you can touch, is very important. And I think there are so many aspects of the trunks that are positive.
Teachers and students love our teaching trunks. They have everything that a teacher needs to teach about the Holocaust in their classroom, and they have everything that a student might need according to their grade level to learn about the Holocaust. The resources in the teaching trunks are super impactful to students, getting to read and learn about real people who went through the Holocaust, read about their experiences, see pictures, and I can attest to how impactful this is because I was a student who received a teaching trunk in their classroom when I was in school. And reading the stories of real people who went through this completely changed my worldview, and it really made me the person that I am today.
There's nothing more important than education. You know, Hitler and the Nazis took everything away from us. The one thing they could never take away from anybody is the education they have.
We just had a trunk recently come back from out of state that was filled with homemade posters and homemade thank you cards to the education department because of the trunk being used in their classroom. Especially with the past few years with COVID, Holocaust education has been much more virtual and much more hands-off. So a lot of teachers and a lot of students really appreciate the fact that they can touch books and posters and the trunk.
Whenever the trunks came to our school, it was almost like a celebration. We had like a party. The thing that I loved about the trunk was that we got resources that we normally would not have gotten in the school system. And so one thing I really loved about it was that there was something for every student. So if the students who liked art, there was something for that student. If they liked reading, there was something for that student. But overall, the trunk was my first and my last experience because it helped the students the most.
This trunk has enabled my students to better appreciate and understand the importance of the worth and dignity of human life as they take one step nearer to being the next generation of leaders and philanthropists. That letter made me feel really, really good.
I think it was February or March in '42 that my older brother came, Tevye. And as I said before, he was a very unique individual that he could spend time with Nazi officers near a table, have dinner, have drinks with him. At times he would be as a white Russian, at times as a Polak. And it was to his credit. In the middle of '42, July, August, you had maybe 40 or 50 people, mostly relatives. He said, where there is 50, it was his idea, there could also be 100. And where there's 100, could be 200 later on. But this was totally his credit. To get anybody, old, young, children, whomever, they should come and we'll push to reward together.
Did they all know each other?
Oh, yeah, sure. Those are all people from Mikuláš. Yes, sure. We were friends. We were Jewish friends. Anyway, so we went there one night and it was September, but in the mountains it started to drizzle already, a cold drizzle. So we went from the village to go to this hut. So we arrived there and, you know, we brought some food and we brought some clothing. We were prepared. And so they built it that we had those like bunk beds, and there was a stove, and you know it was we could live there, but we were still very cautious, and every night and day, always two people were standing just before you went into the valley where we were. We were in a valley. And one day, There were two people. As a matter, that was Dr. Kurtz's son. His name was Joschko. And another man were there looking if anything happens. And at 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning, they were running, and they said, the Germans with the dogs are coming up.
How long had you been at the hut?
We were maybe week or 10 days. Yeah, I don't remember that well. Not a long time, not a very long time now.
Do you know how the Germans found out about it?
Yes, because when they started to build the hut, the Germans already knew about it. Because the peasants were not sympathetic to the Jews. They took the money, they built the house, they took the money, but the Germans knew about it.
So what happened then? You got the warning.
So the warning is, so we were, laying in bed, and, so we just put on very fast, and we were running a little bit higher to the mountain.
All of you?
Everybody, everybody was dispersed, yeah. So everybody was running, and we were running with the Rosenzweig family. The two families we were running, the baby in the arms of the mother, and the three of us. And we were sitting on the mountain. I don't know, probably, if people are religious, would think that God sent it, that it started to snow, very heavily to snow. And we were sitting not far, but higher, and we saw the Germans with the dogs under walking to our hut. And suddenly we heard, let me go back. So everybody was running, not Dr. Kurtz and his wife. They were young people, but they were a little bit overweight. But their son, Joschko, he ran with us. They sent him to run. And they said, we are older, maybe nothing will happen to us. So, okay, so it's time. And we saw the Germans with the dog. And we heard some shooting. We heard some shooting, and we saw some smoke. And then we saw the Germans and the dogs. Then we saw them going again down. The Germans were afraid to stay in the mountains because the mountains were full of partisans. So they did their job. They did their job and they left, and that was lucky for us.
You said something about the snow, maybe God. What about the snow saved you?
The snow, when we were sitting on the mountain, higher, the snow, it started to snow. The snow was so heavy that you couldn't see. Snow, falling snow.
So the Germans went
didn't see us. So they went straight, they knew where to go. They went just to that bunker, to that house. And they killed some people. I thought that they killed the Kurzes. But somebody told me that they saw the Kurzes in Auschwitz. So I don't know.
My mother got wind of outsiders coming in, and later found out that they were from the resistance, that they came into the camp because they were going to save some of the children. My mother spoke to one of them, and he told her what to do. And my mother took my sister and I during the middle of the night, and somehow there was an opening in a fence. We got out, and we were running. We were running through fields, high grass, stones, and my mother just held my sister in one hand and me in the other hand. And she ran and ran till she got to a station where she was instructed to go to. And there she met another resistant person from the resistance. She handed us over to him.
When that happened, my Uncle Max, I must have been about maybe 7 or 8. And my Uncle Max said, you must never, ever tell anybody about this because otherwise we all die. Well, he meant in Germany, but I've never even told my mother. Huh. But I was very fond, as I told you, of my uncle, my 2 uncles, and right. Uncle Max especially, because anything I wanted, he would provide for me. And we came back from, I think he took me for a walk, or we were looking for a bicycle for me, and he wanted me to pick one out. And we came back from the bicycle store, and behind our house in Bielefeld was an alley, like alleys here, and that was a shortcut. So we went that way, and I was a little bit in front of him, and I see this man in a SR uniform lying on the ground, and he was obviously drunk. He was, talking to himself and spitting up it. And I showed Max. I said, there's a guy there. And Max said, yes, a Nazi. I said, yes. I said, what should we do? He said, nothing. We'll go walk right by him and go to our house. And as we went by him, he said, hey, Jew, what are you doing here? And it was somebody who had worked in the building in back of us, which I told you was sort of I don't know, there different organizations used to rent rooms in there, and I don't know what you would call that. Uh-huh. They called it Gemeindehaus in German, which means Gemeinde is a church organization. Right. So they would meet there. Right. And I had seen him. He was one of the guys that sweeps there. He was in a Nazi uniform. And he says, hey, who is that little girl there? And Mike sort of pushed me aside. And he said, you going to screw her too? And Mike said, you be quiet. And he said to me, go into the house and get the rake. Bring it to me right now. And I did. I was so scared. I ran in the house. And my mother wasn't home. I guess that's the maid was. And I got the rake. And he was throwing up the guy and talking terrible to Mike about Jewish pig and you all are going to die. And he said, give me the rake. And he said, I want you to turn around and don't look. And he beat him to death. He was drunk anyway. I know. And he said to me, he's dead. So he said, to go drag him, because it was in the back of our house. So we dragged him down about a block, and there was a railroad crossing there, and we left him there, and never hurt him. And Mike said, if you ever tell anyone, you're going to die. And I've never even told Randy. So I didn't know whether I should tell you that, because it was probably the most scary thing that happened in my life.
My parents, living in the ghetto with me and with extended members of the family, went for a walk in the morning, pushing a carriage with me in the carriage. And a Polish lady came over to them as they were walking and said to them, how can you take this beautiful child and put her into the ghetto? My parents had no idea who this lady was. And my father turned around to her and said, "Well, what am I supposed to do? Can you help us?" And she said, "Yes, I will take your child." The arrangements were made to meet the following morning. I'm sorry. Arrangements were made to meet the following morning. The carriage was supposed to be brought to a corner, an address that was given to my parents. They were to put the carriage in the corner and turn around and walk away. And this lady came and took the carriage. And that was the beginning of my life. My parents stood and watched as the carriage was wheeled away with me in it.
This, I can tell you one case that was the end of the war, when that was already, Germany was almost finished. They took us from one place to the other. From one place to the other, we were walking. They were still hoping that they'll save Germany and then they'll be able to work with us. So as we were walking 20, 30 kilometers a day, our feet got so bad, and you didn't have good shoes either. So my feet were all plagues, and I took only rags and put around my feet. And once we were resting, we got half an hour to rest, and we were resting on the side of the street. And I wanted to take off my rags. My feet hurt terribly, and as they were bloody, the rags were glued to my feet, and I couldn't take them off. And I was crying, sitting there and crying. And there passed two workers. And they stopped and looked at me. "Why are you crying?" And I got so angry that I took the rag and ripped it off my feet, and the blood came out streaming like that. And they stopped. He took off his boots. He had not leather, rubber boots. He took off his boots and he put them near me. Take them, maybe they'll help you." I looked at him and said, "No, I do not want a gift from a German. Take them." He looked at me, he said, "But I'll still leave them." And he walked away barefoot. It was rainy, it was snowy, it was March, cold, and he walked away barefoot. He left his boots there. I can tell you that probably these boots saved my life.
Kristallnacht, then, my sister was already gone. I was going to the bakery every morning with my bicycle at 6 o'clock in the morning. And when the day of Kristallnacht, I went to work at 6 o'clock in the morning. And there were things going on the street, but I wouldn't know what they were. You know, there were trucks running around. It was 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember usually there was nobody on the street yet. And there was excitement going on. You could see things happening, but you didn't see anything. I thought nothing of it. I went to work like I always do. Got to the place that I worked, and there was nobody there. The place was totally destroyed. I mean, they had smashed every dish, and it was just a mess. I looked around for a little bit. There was nobody there. There was a synagogue, a Reformed synagogue, about 2 or 3 doors down, very large synagogue. Nothing had happened there when I was there. And so after a little while, I said, well, I better go back home. On my way home, I had to pass a conservative synagogue in which I was by mitzvah. And there were some people standing there, and they had a photographer standing there. And I have never forgotten this, because he was there with his hood over his head taking pictures. Smoke was coming out of the synagogue. and it was on fire. There were about 50 people there. That picture that I had always in my mind is in the archives. The Anne Frank exhibit has that picture in it. Other magazines and documentation has the picture in it that I was actually there seeing the people. I stopped for a little while, and at that time I still didn't know what was really happening. It was probably 6:30 in the morning, and I went home. When I got home, my father was very sick, and I don't remember what he had. He had bad flu or whatever, but he could barely stand up. He was in bed, very sick. In comes DSS, and they want to arrest him. They get him out of bed, he collapsed, okay? Well, they tried to move him, but they couldn't move him, and he went back to bed. An hour later, they come back, they try to move him again, smashed a few dishes and stuff in our house, and they could not move him, so they took me. I was then 14 years old, so they took me. They took me on a truck with a bunch of other people, and I ended up in a assembly hall, which was a exhibition hall. When I got there, a lot of people in there, and they grouped us into groups of about 100, 3-4 deep, and across, and we stood there. It must have been around 8 o'clock in the morning by the time I got there. 8:30, whatever it was. We stood there all day long. People were falling, couldn't get up after a while, no water, no food, no nothing. And it was that night, 7, 8 o'clock, I don't know the time, when suddenly you could hear things moving, and the groups of people were moving out of the hall, one group at a time. As they came closer to move our group, some SS man looked at me and he says, "How old are you?" I said 14, but I had a beard already, dark beard, so I looked older. He says, "You're only 14? I said, "Yes." He said, "Stand over there." And I moved over there. And pretty soon there were about 8-10 people standing with me. And every group moved out of the hall, and we were the only 10 people left. We then had to sweep the place down, clean it up, and when we were done, they took us out the door. When we got close to the door, we were surrounded by SS in a very tight circle. I didn't know at that time what it was. They then marched us out the door, and there were hundreds of people out there screaming, mostly women. The women were the most fanatic and much worse than the men in viciousness. So they pushed us through that group and protected us from getting beat up. They wanted to tear us apart. And when we got to the end of the walkway, like all these exhibition halls have a large open area where people can come in. When we got up to the street, by that time it was 1-2 o'clock in the morning. And I don't know how long these people had been standing out there, but they were bent to destroy us. And when we got to the edge to the street, the SS jumped aside and left us alone. Well, I was 14 years old. I could run pretty good. I was in good shape. And I ran towards an area where I know I had relatives living not too far apart. I ran, but people kept getting closer. I could hear them hollering in the background, and it sounded louder. After some time, I couldn't run anymore. So in Europe, the telephone booth have a bottom closer. It's glass on top, and if you've ever seen the old ones, the bottom is solid, about a foot high. So I ran to the telephone booth and laid down, and a group of women ran by and screaming and hollering and so on. And luckily, they didn't find me. After the noise died down, I got up and proceeded towards my uncle's house. Well, by that time, everybody knew what was going on, and he wouldn't open the door for me. He was scared. So I finally convinced him to call our house and tell him I was okay. And I walked home from there. I mean, it's a long walk. We were a long way. But things were fairly quiet by then, and I went home. The next day, naturally, we knew more of what went on because all the stores were destroyed, all the, and the Jewish community was really in an uproar. And it was a very trying time at the time because nobody knew what to do. I have a letter that my mother wrote that day. And she really didn't say anything. She said, "We gotta go." And then we worked on leaving the country.